As soon as this clip was released, fans couldn't stop talking about it. In front of the cameras, a friendship that once thought to be unshakable now looks to be crumbling. This is the type of tea that nobody expected to pour so rapidly. Sitting across from Spice, Yandy is venting her anger from years of anger and criticizing Rasheeda for a betrayal she never anticipated. Spice sat there in shock, hardly believing what she was hearing. Not shade or whispers, but a storm of emotions. How could someone who was trusted with someone else's personal pain turn around and let it become a talking point? How could a mutually supportive relationship turn into one that is characterized by accusations and silence? These kinds of questions are flooding fan pages, blogs, and timelines tonight. Yandy not only voiced her opinions, but also tore the curtain off a friendship that her supporters thought would never be broken. And when Spice leaned back, obviously, taken aback, the audience froze. This was more than just reality TV drama. It was betrayal shown to the public. And the repercussions? And that's only the beginning. Yandy leaned forward in the quiet room, the air heavy and almost suffocating, fire in her eyes. Spice shifted in her chair, trying to process the information, but the seriousness of the situation prevented her from doing so. Not because of weakness, but because of the weight of the emotions Yandy had repressed for so long. Her voice cracked slightly. She described late-night conversations, private weeping, and secrets she believed were guarded between friends. But in some way, those same secrets had started to spread through blogs and podcasts, losing their meaning and becoming rumors that the world was now hearing. For Yandy, the betrayal went deeper than any insult could possibly go, since it wasn't only about what was said, but also about who said it. Spice's normally sharp tongue was frozen as she listened, her lips slightly open. She had gone through her own difficulties in the spotlight, so she knew what it was like to confide in a friend about your vulnerabilities. Consequently, it was almost intolerable to feel the hurt in every syllable and to hear Yandy describe the anguish of Rasheeda's remarks. Spice averted her gaze for a time, as if hoping the cameras would stop filming and that this wasn't occurring right now. But nobody can escape reality, and this fact could no longer be hidden. Yandy became increasingly irritated. She recalled some of the times she had confided in Rasheeda, when her own marriage had been in shambles, when she had been unsure of how to go, and when she had been involved in conflicts that the public would never see. She trusted Rasheeda with those comments because she thought the sisterhood relationship was strong enough to keep them together. Instead of comfort, though, she was now coping with the hurt of betrayal and the realization that those private conversations had been made public for everyone to judge. I never sat on a podcast and dragged her. And if I did bring her up, I did so in a sweet and polite manner, Yandy said, shaking her head. But she did not treat me with the same deference. Spice shifted nervously as her tone was caustic. In addition to the rage, there was disappointment, the kind of disappointment that is more painful than anger. As Spice sat there, caught in the crossfire, she couldn't help but think of all the friendships that had already been destroyed by cameras, gossip, and pride. The industry had a way of shattering individuals, turning friends into enemies and secrets, into weapons. Watching it happen so close, among people she considered sisters, was a different kind of grief, though. As night fell, gossip started to spread. Backstage whispers turned into buzzing chatter. Some claimed to have seen Rasheeda quickly depart Spice's performance to avoid a fight. Others claimed that Kirk urged her to leave before things became unmanageable. Online fans started putting together videos right once, replaying Yandy's remarks, and analyzing every single facial expression Spice made during the meeting. In the comments, people took sides, with some applauding Rasheeda for voicing her opinions, and others denouncing her for breaking the friendship code. The split was obvious, and the louder the outcry, the more isolated Yandy appeared to feel. In the middle of it all, Spice tried to speak up with firmness. "Perhaps it's just a misunderstanding," she said carefully, but her eyes betrayed her hesitancy. However, Yandy didn't like it. She leaned back with her arms folded, her voice firm but full of pain. Words hung there, heavy and unquestionable, Rasheeda could already hear rumors of what had happened outside that chamber. She was furious, according to those around her, and insisted that Yandy was exaggerating everything. She told Kirk that after going through her own struggles, she wasn't going to let anyone paint her as a villain. There is no chance of a misunderstanding when you're on podcasts, sitting in interviews, or giving subtle clues about someone's husband. Spice, that's not an error. That's a decision. Though she was too proud to admit it just yet, there was a flicker of regret in the back of her mind, a moment of uncertainty when she realized that maybe, just possibly, she had gone too far. Meanwhile, fans were dissecting every detail of the story, with blogs detailing the breakdown of a friendship and social media reports comparing the icy tension currently leaking onto screens to previous videos of Rasheeda and Yandy laughing together. "It hurts watching this," one fan wrote on Twitter, "because they were supposed to be sisters, and now it's like strangers throwing knives." Rasheeda was totally wrong and knew better than to reveal Yandy's business, said another commenter. The close-knit bond that had persisted through the seasons was now the focus of public discourse. Yandy said with a laugh devoid of humor, "She thought I was going to sit back and take it." Yandy was no longer hiding anything, admitting that she had been silent too long, hoping that things would get better and Rasheeda would realize the damage she was doing, but that it had only made things worse. But not anymore. Her words echoed, like a last warning, promising more fireworks if Rasheeda avoided looking directly into her eyes. After that conversation with Spice, the cast's dynamic shifted. "I'm done protecting people who don't protect me." There seemed to be a buzz of excitement in every room, and every meeting was tense. People wanted to see if Yandy and Rasheeda would finally square up, or if Rasheeda would keep dodging until the pressure exploded on its own. Kirk tried to downplay it, writing it off as just another misunderstanding, but even he knew this was more than a few careless words. It was the breakdown of pride, betrayal, and trust all at once. When pride and betrayal combine, disputes are rarely easily resolved. The Jasmine reference only made things more complicated. When Yandy disclosed that Rasheeda was closer to Jasmine than everyone had assumed, Spice nearly coughed. Her eyes widened, her jaw tensed, and she momentarily lost the ability to speak. The already shocking idea of Rasheeda traveling and living with someone associated with so much prior sorrow had much more weight after hearing it from Yandy. "No way, I don't believe that," Spice responded at first, but Yandy wasn't impressed. She insisted that it was real and advised Spice to listen carefully and draw the connections. Just the thought of that made the entire room tremble. Outside in the real world, fans went bananas. The reappearance of old images and screenshots fueled speculation. Suddenly, every vacation post was studied, every group photo's casual grin scrutinized. People were curious as to whether Rasheeda had been hiding this connection or if she had actually changed sides while pretending to be on both sides. As the treachery angle grew, so did the controversy around her name. Rasheeda, of course, denied everything and brushed off the claims, as just lies meant to discredit her. But the more she denied, the more people looked into it. And as they dug deeper, their interest in why she seemed so eager to stay away from Yandy rather than face her directly increased. Avoidance only made the rumors more intense, and eventually, the problem became too big to ignore. As Spice sat back and relived the entire evening in her mind, she couldn't shake the sense that she was now carrying a secret that was too combustible to keep. She had not asked to be in the middle, but all of a sudden she was the center of attention. Everyone wanted to know what she really thought, what she had seen, and whether she believed Yandy when she stated it. Spice, who enjoyed being faithful, knew that what she was about to say might either calm the storm or stoke the fires. She also realized that in a society where cameras and confessionals are ubiquitous, silence was never really an option. Spice was aware that she needed to exercise caution. It was like standing on unstable ground that could collapse at any moment. Encircled by the fallout from Rasheeda and Yandy, She replayed in her mind all that Yandy had said: the accusation of Jasmine, the anger, the sense of betrayal. Spice couldn't decide if the tension was more painful or shocking, but one thing was for sure: it wasn't going away. In fact, it was growing into something bigger, something that would eventually shake their whole town. In the morning, the blogs were already buzzing more than before. Fan pages were piecing together events, hashtags were increasing in the charts, and recordings from the previous night went viral. The internet, which thrived on this kind of drama, now closely examined every move made by Rasheeda and Yandy. Now, it was less about friendship and more about truth, loyalty, and the complex web of connections that held them all together. Yandy was looking through the comments on her phone, her face taut with frustration, her courage in finally speaking. Up was commended by several of the other writers. Others accused her of being disorderly herself and of seeking to undermine Rasheeda for influence. But to Yandy, none of that mattered. What mattered was that she felt duped, and the public needed to know that. "I know what I shared with her. I know the promises we made, and I know she broke them," she told a close friend. But Rasheeda was doing everything she could to maintain her calm. "They can say whatever they want." She smiled on social media, made funny comments, and acted as though nothing was wrong. But behind closed doors, she was enraged. Kirk tried to reassure her and tell her to go on, but she couldn't deny that Yandy had effectively called her out in front of everyone. Rasheeda paced the room and whispered, "She's trying to paint me as fake. This is what I get after everything I've done to help her? No, I won't give her the final say." When the cast gathered for another event a few days later, the tension was at an all-time high. And despite the music, laughter, and conversation, there was a silent knowledge that Rasheeda and Yandy were both present. Spice arrived first, attracting attention with her usual outfit, but the tension in the room remained despite her lively enthusiasm. She noticed Yandy sitting with a small group across the room, her stance rigid, her eyes darting across the room, as if she were preparing for battle. It was Yandy who made contact, and she got up and strode across the room, her heels clicking like warning signs against the floor, and Rasheeda didn't flinch when he saw her coming. Moments later, Rasheeda entered the room with Kirk at her side, her head held high, her face impassive, and everyone waited for the inevitable moment when the two women would meet, as conversations slowed and eyes flashed back and forth. Spice found herself holding her breath, wondering if tonight would be the night that everything finally blew up, even though she knew in her heart that this was reality TV and that peace was never the main event. When Yandy reached her, the room seemed to quiet down, and everyone was watching them closely, waiting for the sparks to fly. Instead, she straightened her back and prepared to fight back. "So what are we doing right now?" Yandy's voice was quiet but sharp. Rasheeda narrowed her eyes and said, "After everything I told you, are you really going to sit on platforms and talk about my husband and me? Don't pretend that I'm lying out here. You should think about why if what I said resonated with you." The room erupted in loud gasps. Spice pursed her lips as she waited nearby, unsure whether to intervene or let things play out. Yandy approached, her voice low and trembling with emotion. Rasheeda replied without holding back, saying, "You know what you did. You know what I told you when I was weak, and you used it as a talking point. A friend doesn't act like that, and what about the times you left me? What if you were too busy to pick up the phone when I was having problems? Maybe you should stop acting like you're perfect." The back and forth made the room quiet, even Kirk, who is usually quick to defend Rasheeda, remaining silent due to the intense atmosphere. Spice moved uncomfortably, her eyes darting between the two women, knowing that the friendship was already too ruined to be repaired, no matter what was said tonight. The room exploded as the fight continued, and someone called out the name Jasmine. Again. "Why don't you tell everyone about your brief travels?" Yandy snapped, her voice rising. People leaned in to hear every word as whispers spread like wildfire throughout the gathering. You think that people don't know? Do you think that I'm missing the links in the pictures? You are closer to her now than you have ever been to me. Rasheeda froze, the charge piercing her more deeply than she had expected. Spice's palm flew to her mouth as she tried to take in what she had just heard, her jaw dropping. "Please don't make my friendships into something they're not," Rasheeda growled in a harsh voice, her expression tightening, but there was a flicker of shame in her eyes, or maybe it was just annoyance at being so publicly exposed. "You don't have all the answers, and you have no right to dictate who I can or cannot be with," Rasheeda said. But the damage had already been done. The suspicion had been planted in everyone's mind, not just Yandy's. Spice looked at Rasheeda, then at Yandy, caught between disbelief and concern. She knew that this confrontation was inevitable, but she still wanted to end it all and plead with them to depart before things went out of control. Outside the auditorium, fans who had heard about the scene began to speculate. After being leaked, blurry video from the room's perimeter went viral on the internet. Did anyone see Yandy pull Rasheeda over Jasmine? An admirer answered, "Spice's face said it all. She was shook," to the tweet, "This is getting messy." Within a few hours, the disagreement went viral, and all social media was inundated with memes, comments, and ideas. Behind closed doors, Spice tried separately to get in touch with the two women. She initially spoke with Yandy, advising her to pause and think about whether disclosing everything in public was worthwhile. Yandy's voice softened in spite of her resolve. "Spice, I tried to keep it private." "I did, truly." But she persisted, in chatting and prodding. "You have to protect yourself eventually," Spice groaned, realizing that she couldn't dispute that. The energy was quite different when she later chatted with Rasheeda. Rasheeda's tone was steady, her remarks cutting, and she was defensive. Rasheeda insisted, "She wants to make me the bad guy. I didn't do anything to betray her." It was now impossible to ignore the group's divisions. Every conversation seemed to return to the tension between Rasheeda and Yandy, forcing friends to take sides. Some couldn't stop stoking the fires, while others avoided discussing it at all for fear of being dragged into the storm. Everyone knew that the next encounter would be even more explosive than the last, and the atmosphere was electric and unexpected. But I refused to allow her to portray me as weak. "Okay, let's go if she wants war." Spice said, "Okay, let's go if she wants war." The tension in the room was so great that even the quiet hum of the air conditioner sounded too loud. When she tried to defend herself, Yandy's voice broke, but instead of sounding as she had hoped, her words drifted through the atmosphere, leaving everyone silent as if they were waiting for the next blast. Kirk, with his elbows resting on his knees, leaned forward and stared at her intensely, as if he were piercing her with his eyes, while Rasheeda bit her lip and shuffled uneasily, clearly unsure of whether to step in or wait for it to happen. As they continued to roll, the cameras recorded every glance, trembling breath, and emotion that flashed across their faces, and Yandy's chest rose and fell with deeper breaths as her annoyance gradually turned into wrath. As she asked, her voice was steady but tremulous. Kirk didn't even blink, but let the silence do the talking. Mendices shook her head and murmured something under her breath before speaking. Even if his voice wasn't explosive, it had a sharp edge that made everyone freeze. The balance of blame was on the verge of shifting when he turned to face Kirk and stated, "What she said was inappropriate, but don't act like you don't throw daggers too." Kirk's brows narrowed and his jaw tightened, as Rasheeda's hand instinctively went to his arm, as if sensing that he was about to lose it. He stared at Mendices with appreciation and annoyance that he had jumped in, as Yandy's remarks had just made the situation more tense despite his efforts to level the playing field. The crew behind the cameras looked at them and even whispered to each other, sensing that they were recording something that could affect the entire plot of the season. The mood had become intense, almost unbearable, before Kirk sagged back in his chair and feigned a laugh. The chuckle was not one of fun, but rather one of disbelief, bitterness, and a trace of mockery. "You want to act as a mediator now? Did you think she was mistaken?" His remarks were piercing, and Mendices sat up taller as his shoulder muscles tensed. Rasheeda's voice broke as she attempted to defuse the situation. No one listened to her suggestion that perhaps we all just need to take a step back. With her words escaping her mind before they could be caught, Yandy lashed back at Kirk. "You have no idea what it's like to be constantly portrayed as the bad guy and held accountable regardless of my actions. Do you believe that I intended this mess? Do you believe I intended to bring up your son's name?" Her vulnerability briefly cut through the confusion as her voice broke at the conclusion. Kirk, however, was unmoved. His voice was low but menacing as he leaned forward once more. "You destroyed his name, not just dragged it. You left a stain that will never go away. Are you even aware of your actions?" His words hit Yandy like a punch, causing her face to drop and her eyes to lose their battle for the first time. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. Mendices grabbed her hand beneath the table and squeezed it to try to ground her, but the cameras panned in and captured the move as though it were just one more dramatic element to be revealed. When Rasheeda eventually got to her feet, she spoke loudly, shakily, but firmly. "Enough. This is no longer solely a matter of words. It has to do with the damage their remarks have caused, and we can't keep acting like it will go away on its own." Everyone's attention was drawn to her. Rasheeda had remained quiet for a while, trying to combine her loyalty to Kirk with her pity for Yandandy, but suddenly she was enraged. This show is about more than just storylines and cameras. Our lives, our families, and our kids are like this. Once you put things out there, they stick. Whether it's true or not, it sticks. Her voice broke again as she quickly wiped a tear from her face because she was too embarrassed to display it. The silence that followed was deafening. Yandy turned her face away and clenched her jaw as Kirk stared at the floor as if the answers might be written there. Mendices leaned back and finally broke eye contact, his breathing shallow but steady. The whole room felt as if it could soon collapse under the weight of unsaid realities and wounds, too deep to be healed by a single apology. When the producer finally called for a cut, nobody moved. Even when the cameras stopped rolling, the tension remained. If anything, it got heavier without the performance explanation. With a cry, Kirk hurried out of the room, slamming the door, so hard the walls shook. Mendices and Yandy were left alone in the buzzing silence as Rasheeda quickly followed him. Yandy hid her face in her palms and fought back tears, her shoulders quivering slightly. Mendices rubbed her back and whispered something only she could hear, but her body language told him it wasn't working. The weight of what had just happened hung over them, not just as a fight, but as something that would spread far beyond that room. The group stared at one another uncomfortably, with some shaking their heads and others taking notes. This was not another scene, and they all knew it. Relationships, careers, and reputations could be shaped for years to come by such an occurrence. After a while, Mendices stood up and gently pulled Yandy up with him, but she refused to leave the room just yet. She was no longer crying, but her face still held a trace of despair and stubbornness. She muttered to herself, "They'll never see me for who I really am," as she looked at the empty chair where Kirk had been standing. "They see only what they desire to see." Her words were sharp but powerful, and even without a listener, they carried a weight that would not be removed. The battle was far from over, and the storm outside that door was just beginning to gather strength. The silence that followed was terrible, as if everyone was holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The story felt incomplete, despite the fact that everyone had done and said too much. The cameras were still recording, the lights were still blazing bright, and every eye in the room was frantically searching for the next move. Tension lingered, in the air like a storm cloud about to burst. Yandy's voice faltered, not out of fear, but from exhaustion. as though she had been struggling for too long and held too many secrets. No one wanted to hear what she had to say, even though everyone knew it was true. It was the sort of reality that, instead of releasing people, kept them stuck in the catastrophe they had brought about. With his eyes unable to meet anyone else's, Kirk moved nervously, as if the weight of everything had suddenly fallen on him. Rasheeda's breathing became laborious, and her chest rose and fell as though she were bracing for an inevitable wave. And Mendices, who had worked hard to guide the discussion, was compelled to keep quiet as he was unable to refute or defend it without making things worse. Outside the room, the murmurs had already begun to spread. Crew members glanced at each other, pulled out their phones, and communicated furiously because what they had just witnessed was more important than the event. It was spontaneous, authentic, the sort of stuff that catches on like fire on dry grass. Everyone was aware that social media will explode as soon as it appeared. Because they thrived on this kind of chaos, online users were keen to examine every gesture, look, and half-truth that was spoken. And yet, within that stuffy room, no one cared about the audience anymore. They weren't portraying characters or acting out scenes. This was pain stripped bare. The masks could not be put back on. Tears began to form on Yandy's cheeks, which she quickly wiped away. But the vulnerability was already noticeable. She was no longer trying to win or prove a point. The effort of holding too much for too long was simply causing her to collapse. Rasheeda, who had sworn never to let herself be pulled any farther, felt her anger change into something gentler, something she couldn't tell if sympathy or exhaustion. She reached for her glass without taking a sip, despite her palm shaking, slightly. Instead, she looked at Yandy with a mix of pity and resentment, torn between wanting to comfort her and wanting to be gone from her forever. Finally, with his elbows resting on his knees, Mendices leaned forward and spoke in a low, scratchy voice, as if speaking were an expense. He asserted that the disputes, accusations, and betrayals should be kept private, and that he never meant for things to reach this stage. He admitted that the person he had become in the spotlight was not who he really was, and that he no longer recognized himself. His words cracked in the middle, and for the first time, no one stopped him. Even if they didn't believe anything that was said, they just listened because they felt the weight behind them. Kirk let out a long sigh and massaged his temples, as if trying to block out the entire day. Maybe they had all gone too far. Maybe too much had been captured on camera. Maybe they had all lost control of the story they thought they were writing. He muttered. It wasn't defensive, but his tone was worn, the kind of weariness that creeps into bones and never leaves. Rasheeda looked at him sharply, as if to inform him that such a revelation was too late, but she said nothing. With phones buzzing nonstop with notifications, the chaos outside grew louder as the first whispers found their way to the internet. The production team discussed in whispers whether it was safe to keep filming, whether to step in, and whether to keep going. They knew, too, that this was a significant lift to the ratings and that only a major disaster that would shut everything down could stop it. Yandy stood up suddenly, her chair squeaking on the floor, her hands clenched into fists. Rather than in rage, her voice rose with finality. She asserted that she was unable to keep tearing herself apart while strangers consumed the pieces. She didn't wait for anyone to stop her, and she didn't give a damn about cameras or contracts. As she just walked out, the sound of the door slamming behind her echoed across the room like the end of an era. The silence that followed was worse than before. Rasheeda blinked wildly, choking back her own tears, which she would never admit she had shed. Mendices sat motionless, as though the idea of losing her, even at that exact moment, had struck him more than he had expected. Kirk looked at the floor, his lips clenched hard, knowing that words could not repair what had just broken. Hours passed in what felt like minutes. At last, Rasheeda said in a soft yet sharp voice, "Maybe they were fighting themselves instead of each other," she said, trapped in a world that needed more drama than any human being could take. No one disagreed with her because, for once, she was right. As the night went on, everyone knew that this moment would never end, even if no one spoke it out loud. As a result, their professions, families, and reputations would all suffer. Fans would repeat the movie over and over again, changing every detail, but they would never feel the weight of being in that room, hearing voices crack, and seeing walls shatter. Only those who went through such pain had a right to it. When the cameras finally stopped, the weariness was complete. They didn't rush to one another, they didn't embrace, and they didn't make amends. They simply drifted apart like strangers at the end of a long storm, knowing that nothing would ever be the same. Contracts might demand it, the program might. Go on. But the trust was broken, the connection was broken, and the damage was irreparable. In contrast to the chaos within, the chilly night air outside the building was almost mocking in its calm. People had already gathered, shouting questions and waving phones, hoping to get a sight of someone leaving. Voices screamed, flashes flashed, and they all realized that the fighting was not limited to the room, but was taking place everywhere. There was nowhere to hide or find safety, because everyone on the planet was watching and never looked away. And as the cars slowly drove away, leaving the streets buzzing with speculation, the story was no longer theirs to tell. It belonged to the blogs, the headlines, and the fans who would analyze, and exaggerate it beyond what had actually happened. They had lost it, but maybe they knew deep down that they had never really had control in the first place. Everyone, pay attention. We would want to know what you think about everything that just happened. Will they be able to put things right? Or do you think this drama will change everything forever? The tension, the emotions, and the betrayals in this one make it clear that fans will have different thoughts. Some are shocked that it has come this far, while others are already taking sides. Now is your chance, so feel free to express your thoughts in the comments section. This narrative will only grow in scope, so don't be bashful. In order to avoid missing the next twist, please remember to subscribe and hit the like button if you're as shocked as we are. I promise that what's going to happen will leave everyone in disbelief, so you'll want to be the first to know.